Hi, folks. You're with Tacitus Today. Tacitus Today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio, radio, no pictures live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the teaching of history and how history, particularly about the West and in regard to white civilization, has been completely hijacked by radical activists and has been rewritten to cast and depict and portray white people as being evil and bad and oppressors, and all brown and black people as being good, and so on and so forth. And of course, history is far more nuanced than that. Now, that super anti-white, anti-Western narrative that's taken over all the not simply the universities, but the high schools, the history magazines. Once much vaunted history magazines that were considered to be the gold standard in historical accuracy and something that would be the final word on reference accuracy. That's all gone. They've all been turned over to hysterical radical activists now that come out with absolute nonsense. The facts don't matter anymore. What matters is the ideological representation of events of the past, of course, which are very different from the factual representation, or shall we say the nuanced representation. I mean, I could give almost endless examples, but I was reading one a little while ago where it was some British ships were at some island somewhere and in the Pacific, and the natives had decided to kill a few of the crew that were collecting fresh water from one of the streams. So this was viewed with much concern, and as you can imagine, it's treated as a murder. And so when the British, the captains or whoever was in charge there complained, they were attacked and they managed to get away. So then in the evening or the early morning, the natives came along in boats with in attempting to paddle boats attempting to board the British ships, and so the officers gave the order to open fire with the cannons, and as you can imagine, there were a number of the natives were killed. Now, this was portrayed as a case of, well, this just shows, white people known for their white supremacist, colonial, fascist Nazi attitudes, opened fire on the helpless brown people, oppressively killing them, and little babies crying, and so that it was presented in that sort of light. But they didn't mention the white people or the British sailors that had been murdered the day before. They didn't talk about that. So that was all left out. So instead of giving the nuanced version of history, well, it's very different if if you have the facts and also the interactive goings on. Now, here's another one here where in a fairly remote outpost, British outpost and this is in a British colony. Some religious agitators came into the district, and they said that the British were about to defile religious symbols of the local religion. The British weren't even considering it. That was all just agitators and stirrers. So they came in, and as a result, a number of British officials were murdered. Knifed in the back alley and that sort of thing. And the local British authorities were obviously concerned. Their employees are getting murdered, and that they were aware about the agitators in town, but they couldn't catch them. And so the situation is becoming a little inflammatory. Then a mob starts to form, or unruly and surly mobs are starting to gather. So the local governor doesn't have many soldiers there. He's got maybe half a dozen or so soldiers. He realizes that the amount of unrest is such that he's going to need reinforcements. So he sends off to the main city asking for help. And they say, look, we can help you, but because of the weather, the roads are impassable at the moment, so we can't get any any reinforcements to you for a week or so. But things are really boiling over sort of right now, and the local governor realising that he doesn't have many resources at his disposal, not only to quell the unrest, but to prevent them getting murdered, for goodness sakes. So a mob gathers in a certain area, and so he gives the order that they must disperse, and he doesn't want a sort of unruly mob sort of gathering and then marching and descending on the officers and so on. The officers, by the way, aren't well defended. Not like they got a fortified position or something. So, and again, there's him, some officials, and 6 soldiers. So there's not a lot of them there, and the the mob refuses to disperse. So this goes on for some hours where the mob is exhorted to disperse. The mob, by the way, realizes that no reinforcements are coming. They know that they can overwhelm the local British outpost here, so they're sort of ginned up by that and think that they're holding the aces. So they refuse to disperse. The government official in charge then sends a couple of clerks in, like public servant guys, to distribute literature to the mob, saying, look, if you disperse, there won't be a problem. Just, chill out and go home. And those officials are then murdered. So the temperature is rising all around, and you can imagine that the British official there would be suitably concerned about the situation. So they've got a number of machine guns. So they bring up the machine guns. Another order is given for the crowd to disperse, otherwise we will fire. Some shots are fired over their head, still no response. So they turn the guns on the crowd. Now this is today. This is the evil British, the evil colonial oppressors just open fire on helpless brown people, helpless with little children, tiny baby children screaming for mama, and so this is ginned up with the most emotive language imaginable. When the reality, of course, is not mentioned. The murder of multiple British officials, that hours were spent trying to get the mob to disperse, and the various other factors. Now you can look at it now and say, well, did the British governor or official there in charge, did he panic unnecessarily? Well, unnecessarily, maybe not. I think he had a lot to be worried about. But could he have stared down the mob? Brought the machine guns and maybe more shots over the head or something. And now, when you delve into the details, they actually had limited ammunition, so they realised that in reality, if it came to a serious showdown with a big mob, they didn't have enough ammunition for the machine guns to fight a sustained battle or anything like that. So they again, given all these things were going on, no reinforcements, multiple murders, a big unruly mob, the agitators stirring up trouble and so on, then the only way to break the danger, or to prevent the danger from escalating, was to open fire. Now the guy sort of clearly regretted. He wished he hadn't had to go to those, because then they have to spend a lot of time building bridges and trying to calm things down afterwards. So it's not something that any governor wants to do. It's just because they were getting on with these people fine until the agitators came in. So it's not like it was an unruly sort of mountainous tribe that you're never going to get on with. So who cares? And if there's shooting and battles, these were people they had got on with previously. But that's not taught. So the nuance of history just isn't being taught. It's presented evil, white man, bad. Similarly with the exploitation of resources in things like iron ore and whatnot, or things in Africa. It's depicted as outrageous exploitation of helpless brown people, and now when the British went to many parts of Africa, they found tens of thousands of acres of very good quality arable land where there was nothing being grown. There were no farms. There was nothing. And so to say today, well, look at that exploitation. You took that land away from the black, but the black people weren't using it. The local people weren't using that land. They weren't growing anything on it. And when plots of land were given to them to farm, they didn't make the most of it. In fact, they just disregarded it, and the land fell into disuse. So this idea that there were these highly productive black farmers doing very, very well until evil white economy is simply not true. It's a lie. But yet that's the presentation of white exploitation of helpless black and brown people. Another favourite one is that the British or Europeans generally took various minerals and additives to the production process, as in the advanced technology. Now, bear in mind that the people that the British were taking these, where they were mining these things, phosphates, whatever, when they were mining them, were Stone Age people. So they had not even the vaguest concept of the technology involved in making smelting metals to make ships and steam engines. They couldn't even conceive of that sort of level of technology. But it's still argued, well, you exploited them because you took their minerals. It was theirs. Why did you take it? Now, it's different if you take it, if you go to another advanced country. They know what it's for, and they themselves have that, and they sell the minerals to you at a international market price. But these people had no concept. They didn't even know what it was. What is that stuff? How do you turn it from being a lump of rock into being a ship, and so on. So they had no concept of this, and the reality is that the cost of getting that, the mines, the equipment to do the extraction, the pumps to keep the water out, the port facilities, the railways, all of that was paid for by the British investor. So they put the entire roads, they put the entire infrastructure in place. And then the argument is, well, you should also have paid an international market price, even though you put all the infrastructure in place for free. Well, no, there's no economic system works that way. And if you're going to carry on about that, scream about what the Chinese are doing in Africa today. There's no commentary about them doing terrible things, but they're doing exactly that. They're putting infrastructure in place, and in return, they want favourable trading conditions for things like mining and so on. So the depiction of history is only one-sided, evil whitey exploiting helpless black and brown and so on. When in reality you'd struggle to come up with that view. And when the even today, international mining engineers that I've known quite a few of them. They say you cannot leave the maintenance and running of the mine to the local black. Even today, let alone 200 years ago, even today you can't. Even ones that have been educated in the West, and so you just can't do it. The maintenance and all the other key things just won't get done. Now, then it's just an attitude thing. They just plain won't do it. And so the mining companies, who would love the cheap labour if they could, effectively use it, they just can't, and so they don't. For the most menial tasks, sure, but for any tasks involving complexity, no. So really, it's hard to find examples of exploitation. You can find them, and they're there, and there's no question that they're there. But the idea that it's evil whitey exploiting, it's far more nuanced than that. For example, there, in some places, the sabotage was such that there was a large military presence that was required. That's really expensive. So that cost was added back into, if you like, the cost of production and so on. So these are the history is very nuanced. Now, I was lucky in, I think it was, year 10 or something of high school, where we got a teacher that insisted on that we had to read any subject. We had to read literature that represented the two extremes of an argument. For example, Napoleon Bonaparte was a really good guy, and well, not necessarily a good guy, but a great man in history, and the other side arguing that he was a rotten, no good son. So you had to. So the teacher said you must read both of these, as in the two extremes about Napoleon Bonaparte, and then you have to produce an essay that argues persuasively which depiction of Napoleon is closest to accurate, and this, not that I was unaware of that idea of a nuanced sort of thing. I got that, but to put it into a disciplined format at that early age, I was able to, if you like, further develop my capacity to realise the nuance of history, that things aren't always as they seem. And when you look at the forces at play, the interactions, the preceding interactions, you can start to see that British official that turned the machine guns on the people, that in reality, pretty much anyone probably would have done what that guy did, to try and depict him now as an evil white supremacist oppressing. That's completely wrong. It's not true. That isn't what happened. So you also learn to look at things like the balance of probability, given the level of given what was going on. The probability was the outcome was always going to be something like that. Now you can move a couple of degrees left or right, but it's pretty much going to be about this. And given the human condition, it's going to end up more or less in that place. Now you can look at different societies, particularly as European and Western society was gravitating towards the scientific method, whereas other societies weren't. So, voodoo witch doctor could get up somewhere in Africa, oh, well, let's do this, and they'd all go chasing after the white people. So you can see that sort of those sort of eruptions weren't related to what we would think is a scientific method. So it's much harder to ascertain, other than rampant mobs. It's much harder to ascertain the balance of probability in such a situation. Other examples can be, say, the British invasion of Zululand. A lot of it was political. I mean, you could say some of it's the Zulus raiding across the rivers and this sort of thing. But the British invasion of Zululand in, I think it was the late 1870s, in what today at least is part of South Africa. This idea that it was evil whitey just going to try and beat up on the black people, so that's not right. And the idea that the British everything the Zulus did in response was just as a result of direct provocation of the British. There was provocation and so on, but it didn't mean the Zulus and some of the Zulu lieutenants weren't spoiling for a fight. They were, and they were licking their lips at the prospect. And so when you see things in this wider angle, you realise that history is very nuanced. But that's been lost, and history has been ideologically captured. It's being purposefully, in my view, used to try and shame, blame, and white people, and to detach them from their history. Other examples, I read a recent history about one of the British great seafarers and cartographers and so on, and depicting him as some evil white supremacist oppressor. But to do that, they had to omit lots and lots of facts. They had to omit wide sections of context and so on. In order to make that, so they're willfully approaching it. So any mitigating factor is being removed, just so that all you have left is evil white supremacist fascist oppressor, and that's how history is being depicted now. And we must return to the nuanced version of history. And I've spoken to kids that are at university, that are friends of ours, and their children and so on, and they have such a perverted, warped view of history that when you explain some things and say, well, have you read this? Well, have you considered it? Like, oh, no, I hadn't considered that. And, oh, wow, that's interesting. And, I've got a book on that. You may like to borrow it. That type of thing. And you find that it is possible to change minds and change views, but they're getting such a narrow view of history, which is all, vehemently anti-white and anti everything that the white people achieved. Another one is, and I'll close with this, is in the claim that the white countries only became rich because they stole it all from the brown and black people. This is something that's prevalent amongst pretty much all the poor countries or poorer countries of Asia and so on. And I was talking to a Malaysian guy a little while ago, and he just came out with it. No, the white people are only rich because they stole all the money from the brown people. That's why, they're no better than us. And why? How come they're rich and we're not? And it must be because they stole it. And they've got this very, very simplistic view of things, which, by the way, is ginned up by the NGOs. NGO propagandists and agitators are all over the third world saying this same thing, and justifying mass immigration. Well, you need to go to the white countries because why your country's poor? It's because those white folks started it all. So you go to those white countries and take back what's rightfully yours. And this is very much an adage. Now, when you talk about all the inventions that white people, particularly again because white people embraced the scientific method, Britain and being the first sort of serious cab off the rank there, you talk about everything from the steam engine to the spinning jenny to drainage and drainage engineering and pumps and whole range of things, lighting, gas lighting, electric lighting, different methods to produce steel from iron and all this sort of stuff. Just the technology in creating steam, the boiler making technology, that sort of thing. This was all Western inventions, and these made a massive difference to productivity, transport, cost of delivering, cost of acquiring, all this sort of stuff that hitherto would have been inconceivable. On top of this, the Western capacity, again, from the scientific method, contract law, due legal process, independent courts, private property, protection of private property, all these sorts of things are why the West became wealthy. That because of that huge technological advantage, they also went on to do other things, such as setting up colonies and trading. But if you look at when the white people came to Australia, they set up large scale agriculture that the local Aborigines had again couldn't even conceive. Sheep farming, all sorts of enterprises and undertakings that were beyond the conception of a Stone Age people. So these things didn't exist beforehand. So the idea that they were already here and were just stolen by white people, of course, is beyond absurd. So this is the history is being so misrepresented today that it's hard to believe you could even call it history. The propaganda past or something like that. I mean, it needs to be renamed. But can nuance be? Now, I've noticed that the brighter the kid, the more they can sort of understand nuance, intricate causes and effects and matrix interactions, and these are the more they can. But if they're low IQ, which of course most of the uni students today are, the kids that would have flunked out of junior high school are being waved through into university today, then they're not really able to understand that level of nuance. It's just too difficult for them to grasp. They can understand simple thing, white man bad, everyone else good. That they can understand, but beyond that, they struggle. So, is a nuance history the confines of a higher IQ student, or can it be taught in such a way that the nuanced version of history, can it be taught in such a way that others would understand it? Let me know your opinion below. You've been with Tacitus today, your Pushback channel. Thank you for listening.